I'm a mom, I'm a principal, which is super busy. So it's really difficult to drive to our district education center for a session, or sometimes it's even hard to sit down and read an entire book because that might take me a month. So, audiobooks, podcasts are the way to go when it comes to learning. And when you want to dig deeper, you buy that book or you go onto YouTube and you research the topic some more. So, I thought, why aren't we doing that for our principals? So, Linda and I talked about it, and then we had a meeting. And this meeting, I think, was in last June. And we were sitting in the room. It was myself, it was Linda, it was Christie. And we were talking, and then Linda and I looked at Christy, and I said to Christy, as she's sitting there, I said, I think you should do it with me. It's more fun when you do something together. And Christy just looked at us and said, okay. And it's been wonderful, like to do this podcast with a partner. And we have a lot in common, but we're also very different. It's perfect. And it's just more fun.
And our memories are slightly different. And we laugh about this all the time because I do remember the meeting as well. And I remember Sundeep having this great idea. And I remember feeling that I was there to support this idea. But how I got involved in it, I'm really not sure.
Who doesn't like it when a great idea kind of comes together and it happens? And that's the story today with the Leading Voices in Education podcast put out by Surrey School Division and hosted by Sundeep Chauhan and Kristi Blakeway. And I invited these two ladies on the show because I've known Kristi for a long time. She is just one of my very favorite educators. When I think of amazing is often the word I use to describe her. And while we don't get into the depth of her background and her passions outside of education, and that's also in education, we just, again, revisiting her passion in this new format with her colleague Sundeep. And that opening story, I think, sets the stage for I had an idea, I put it to my board, and it happened. And the thing you have to keep in mind, too, is that Surrey School District is the largest school district in British Columbia. They serve, upwards of 80,000 students. And so often we think about large school districts as just being difficult for change. Everything just takes so much longer, the bureaucracy, all that stuff, which is, they're not immune to that. However, knowing the culture of that particular school board, we, Mark Permain, the superintendent, but also Linda Reeve is mentioned as a superintendent that said, it's a good idea, let's do it. That is such an empowering thing. And so that's part of why this story fascinates me. And the other part is just, listen, this is a bit of a deep dive into the whole role of podcasting and how that's a helpful and useful medium for professional learning. And that's exactly the reason that Sundeep and Kristi decided this might be a good endeavor to support their educators and principals specifically, but all leaders in their school division. So always great to get together. It was great to meet Sundeep. Never met her before. She's obviously, as you'll find out, a pretty fantastic and amazing educator herself. But just happy to have these ladies share their story of their new podcast, Leading Voices in Education. You can find that on Apple and Spotify, and enjoy my conversation today. So this is going to be a little bit of a meta podcast because we're going to be talking about podcasting, which is a topic I like. I've known Kristi for a lot of years. Sometimes I ask people to tell me like our origin stories, like how did you and I connect? I think we know the story, but I want to hear you tell it.
Okay, well, it's kind of funny because I could tell it from my perspective, or I could also tell it from your perspective that you shared with me after the fact. So I'm going to merge them together. So Dean was in Vancouver and he was hosting an Ignite night where people came and gave talks. And so someone had passed on the invite to me and said, hey, like maybe you want to put your name in to possibly do a talk. What I didn't realize is that most of the people speaking that night already knew Dean. So yeah, they were nudged to do the talk, but he already knew who they were, which is really smart when you think of it through a lens of planning an event. You want it to go well. But I guess I was a little bit of a wild card anyway. So So I had the opportunity to speak that night. So we had educators from around Metro Vancouver, and I gave a quick 10 minute, I forget what it was it 10 minutes? Ignite talk
Wow.
about some work I was doing with students and the work we were doing to help people on the downtown east side reconnect with family. And yeah, so it went well. And after that, it led actually to quite a few other opportunities to share that story and share that work. And then after Dean told me, he's like, I didn't know if it would be good, but I liked it. So we've stayed connected since then.
It was one of those, I remember those moments, and I had a few of those. So you're right in that I would host these events and it would be like whatever, we had 8 or so speakers, and 6 or 7 I was like, yeah, okay, I know this person. I'm with. And then somebody said, "What? Yeah, it's this person." All right. And my standard line, which was, it's not very nice, but it's, listen, even if they suck, it's only 5 minutes. Like you can live through a 5-minute crappy talk. And anyway, it turned out to be like, I was just blown away. I still see the picture of, and I don't know if it was a stock photo, but the story behind your mom, who was teaching you at a very young age that this is an important way to live a life, and that we care for those who are less fortunate. I just remember some specific moments from that, because it was such a powerful thing. And we could do a whole other talk, and I know on another podcast that I've had in the past, I have talked with Christie, so you can find lots about Christie's very cool work. And then, Sundeep, how did we meet?
I don't think we've met before. This is the
Like
first
10
time
minutes
I've
ago?
met you.
That's our origin story.
I know.
So, listen,
I'm just a principal working in schools, doing my
don't say
best work.
just. You are a principal. You're not just a principal. But yeah, so here's the origin story of this episode, is that I noticed that Christie and Sundeep were starting a podcast for Surrey schools. And I just thought, that's very fascinating. I don't suggest that you're the only 2 people who have started a podcast for their district. There's not that many, though. So let me just start with, where was this idea born?
So about a year ago or more, I had approached our assistant superintendent, Linda Reeve, about why doesn't Surrey Schools have a podcast? Simply because most of my learning is done through podcast. I'm a mom, I'm a principal, which is super busy. So it's really difficult to drive to our district education center for a session, or sometimes it's even hard to sit down and read an entire book, because that might take me a month. So audiobooks, podcasts are the way to go when it comes to learning. And when you want to dig deeper, you buy that book, or you go onto YouTube and you research the topic some more. So I thought, why aren't we doing that for our principals? So Linda and I talked about it, and then we had a meeting, and this meeting I think was in last June. And we were sitting in the room. It was myself, it was Linda, it was Christie, and we were talking. And then Linda and I looked at Christie, and I said to Christie, as she's sitting there, I said, I think you should do it with me. It's more fun when you do something together. And Christie just looked at us and said, okay. And it's been wonderful, like, to do this podcast with a partner. And we have a lot in common, but we're also very different. It's perfect. And it's just more fun.
And our memories are slightly different. And we laugh about this all the time, because I do remember the meeting as well. And I remember Sundeep having this great idea. And I remember feeling that I was there to support this idea. But how I got involved in it, I'm really not sure. I just remember, when you're in a meeting and you can catch people making eye contact, like behind your head, like I could tell Sundeep and Linda were looking at each other. I feel like they had a conversation beforehand that I wasn't part of. I had no idea that I was part of the podcast until we were in that meeting, when I don't know the wording that was used, but I think I was kind of voluntold. And so I had no idea how to make a podcast. And somehow then I found out in the meeting we were doing it together. But as Sundeep has said, like, it's been such a neat journey, not only to learn how you produce a podcast, but also to come together and share different ideas and perspectives and learn. And absolutely, it was Sundeep's idea, and she has taken me out of my comfort zone and trying something new. So it's been quite the journey.
It reminds me of my early years as a teacher. The very first district committee I was on, I don't remember what the committee was, but I just remember feeling I was like a second or third year teacher, like a bit of a big shot. Hey, I'm getting invited to the big boy table here, the big girl table, sitting around there. And I don't remember what the thing was, but I remember a principal said, I feel comfortable with Dean taking the lead. And I remember my pea brain went to, wow, that's awesome. This person thinks a lot of me. And then I'm doing whatever the task I'm saying yes to. Then I realized later that was just his way of saying you do the job, not me. But I always love that line now. I feel very comfortable with Sundeep and Kristi taking on this role because there's that early compliment that makes you feel like you're, but I don't know in the end if it's just, this is just my way of saying to be voluntold. So I don't know if that's what, no, but I think about that. So, all right. So here you are. How many episodes have you recorded to date?
Oh,
I
gosh.
believe we've recorded 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Kristi, you said you know nothing about podcasting. Sundeep, you're obviously an avid listener. Did it go much beyond that in terms of your understanding of what it was going to actually take?
You know what? It's quite a bit of work. So in the planning, like as I was presenting it to Linda, I remember really thinking it through because it was an idea that I had been forming for a while and thinking, okay, like how do you do this and how many hours is it going to require to come up with the questions, to research the guest? The side that I didn't know anything about, and neither did Christy, was a technical side. So that piece, there's little things, right, that you learn that the guest should have headphones or a certain type of mic, which platform is best, how do you use AI to make it sound great. And then there's this whole other side of the marketing of your podcast, like the Instagram. Do we need a YouTube channel? So it's a whole thing. And we had to really sit down and think, okay, like how are we going to do this? How is it manageable in terms of time? Which it's not because we're texting each other all day, constantly multitasking. But that's part of the fun. Yeah, so that was a piece, and I know there's a lot of learning that we still have moving forward, and we're going to look back at this journey and be like, remember when we had no idea about this?
Oh, yeah.
Or the time that we recorded and we had to re-record again our voices because we were missing a wire. Just really silly things like that.
Yeah, so I had the good fortune to develop. I should have shared. If I'd have known, I'd have given you a whole podcasting manual for the state of Michigan. So I did. I had done podcasting, but I hadn't done the deep dive of all of the things, like what platforms you should use, what microphones, the things you said too, Sundeep, about how you market your pod. So I had a chance to do all that stuff. I don't know that I follow all the things that I wrote about
Yeah.
or created in there, because I get to a point where I hit good enough, maybe quicker than most. But at the same time, I'm always fascinated by the process because everybody tackles this a little differently. So what have you estimated? And again, hard to estimate because how do you count all the brainstorming time? But in terms of like how long it takes to actually get a podcast recorded and out the door, have you calculated the time on that takes?
No, because we do it all the time. Like I'm telling you,
You're always talking. So
it's recess time and I'll be like, we need to have this guest. We should have this theme. And Christy is the same way. So it's not us sitting down for an hour to brainstorm because we're so busy in our own jobs.
yeah.
It's sharing our Word docs with each other, adding into it during lunch hours or after school. It's texting each other at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., calling each other on the way to work. But thank goodness we're both hard workers and we have the same vision for what we want. So it works. Christy, how about you?
I think that's what really grounds us is that when Sundeep had this idea, we shared this across our district with principals and vice principals and asked, like, would this resonate? Would you like a podcast? And the resounding voice was like, some of our schools are a good hour away and there's always traffic, there's always construction. So if we can shift professional learning where it's easier for them to access it at their fingertips instead of driving to a meeting or waiting or finding out that maybe a certain event we don't have room for everyone to attend, that there was really an appetite for it. So we're always using that lens of how do we shift professional learning so that it works with our educators who are so busy and don't necessarily have the time to always do things in person in ways that we used to do in the past. And so that kind of grounds us. And we've been really lucky. Like we kind of started to dream big and reach out to people, and we just, I guess, weren't afraid to ask, and people just have been saying yes. So yeah, like our first guest with Peter Fenge, maybe in retrospect, we would have done a few practice recordings before we started with a somewhat well-known guest that we'd never recorded a podcast before. So it took us I think until episode 4, or maybe it was the first 3 that we just have sound. We hadn't figured out the right platform to have video as well. So Only a few have launched so far. We're launching one every second Tuesday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But if you can hold on, by the time we hit episode 4, the video will arrive with the guests moving forward. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things I think about. I love the way in which you reached out to your community to ask them what they think, and it reminds me of and I don't remember the name of the district that I worked with, but they started a podcast and they named it. They calculated that the average commute for their staff was 18 minutes, so they called it something the 18-minute whatever road to Surrey or whatever. I don't remember what it was, but I thought that was so intentional to say we envision most of you listening it on your drive to and from your buildings. And so here's a way to kind of, which I thought was cool. But the other thing I wanted to call out before it loses me is that just this process of Sundeep, you coming up with this idea, sharing it with a superintendent, Linda, who basically said, yeah, let's do it. I think there's something really important for leaders and organizations to embrace is kind of that being open to yes. So that I know you said you're just a principal, you're not, but that a principal or a teacher or whomever has an idea that says, I think this would be great. And somebody says, yeah, let's make it happen. Let's figure out a way. So, and again, the years I've spent in Surrey, that doesn't surprise me. That's the way that would go. But I just wanted to call that out because I think that's pretty powerful. So, all right, you kind of touched on a little bit about your goals, but maybe let's drill deep into that. And I'm thinking, Kristi, your role as director of instruction, building professional capacity, obviously there's some direct connections to your work for sure. And so I'd love to hear from you, from your perspective, is how it's going to help you in that role specifically, but also Sundeep, from you being potentially the target audience for a lot of this stuff, how this might kind of, what you hope this is accomplishing.
Sure. So we laugh because we never know the exact number, but we have about 138 schools. So when we have all our principals and vice principals in the room, there's at least 300 people that come together. And so it's hard to reach a large group all at once. And so the podcast really gave us an opportunity to rethink our professional learning. We also do a lot of leadership development for our principals that is face to face. So whether you're in an acting role or a first year principal or vice principal or second year principal or vice principal, you are in a specific cohort of leaders that come together once a month for a half day session. And Sundeep is actually one of the mentors that works to support our new leaders. And so we had been buying books physically and giving whatever anchor text we want to use for each cohort, giving them each a copy of one book. But what we found is that's great because we're introducing them to one person's ideas or frameworks or whatnot. But we were limited a bit by budget too, talks that are current and that we could infuse this with our Leading the Learning program. So part of it is that we intend to use our podcast recordings as a teaching tool in our leadership framework. We'll give an example too. Sundeep had mentioned earlier about a learning series we're doing. So our district has been doing a lot of work around compassionate systems. And so we put the call out to teachers and principals if they would like to come together face to face 4 times during the year to learn about compassionate systems tools. So our first 2 podcast guests intentionally were Peter and then an educator from Singapore, Nicola Wilson, as they talked about the why behind compassionate. We had about 200 educators together and we were doing some hands-on learning, but we also concluded by sharing the podcast links with them. So on their drive home or on their drive this morning, they can enrich that learning that was face to face by having the podcast, or maybe they take the podcast recording back to their school and infuse part of it into their staff meeting or with the educators they're working with. So we're trying a new way of learning and infusing it into the system that we have.
What about you, Sundeep? When you think about what Kristi shared, and I know again you're part of obviously the production of it too, but in terms of how you see this being a useful tool as you shared in the original pitch, how this is going to be helpful for you.
I think I looked at it through the lens of a principal working in schools, and how when I listen to the podcast I listen to in the morning on my drive to work, there's always little takeaways that I think, okay, I can apply this to myself. And then how can this be used with teachers? So there's a difference in podcasting in the sense that who is your target audience for each particular podcast? So we've been pretty like Christie had said, with our first two podcasts, there was Peter, which is he's so excellent with systems thinking, and then a classroom teacher talking about it. Nicola Wilson was our second podcast. So that's the lens that I bring to it. It's more like, how can we really use this in a school? And so when we are asking questions, I'm constantly thinking about my teachers.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my colleagues who are like, what can they take away from this? What can I take away from this? So that's really important to me, because I feel that our jobs are a lot, like they're overwhelming at times. We're juggling a whole bunch, and how do we stay motivated, or what are little tidbits that we can take and we can apply today and build on it? Or even a podcast that you can go back and listen to and say, you know what, I'm not ready for that now, but later on I will be, because there's podcasts that I think I can't do this right now, but this is an episode that I'm going to go back to and I'll listen to.
Yeah, there's so much affordance that a podcast recording gives you. To your point, it's on demand. I can use it whenever. But I think there's also something, and I'm going to ask you in a second about thinking about your podcasting influences. There's something different about the experience of audio. The fact that you literally have someone in your ear. There's an intimacy, there's a personal connection that you have that's even different from watching something, right? You're out on a walk, you're in your car, it's just you and them, right? There is that feeling of this person's speaking to me. That is powerful. And I haven't fully wrapped my head around what that means and how might I, as a podcast host, tap into that in a better way. I'm at good enough stage, so maybe there's things I should be saying, doing differently. However, I think over time you build a connection with your audience, and they just are comforted by your familiarity of that, and they're like, all right, this is a person that I know where this person's going. I know their vibe, and so I'm waiting for what they're gonna share, who they're gonna introduce me to. So I think that's a really important thing that I don't know that I love to. I can see it in other people more than myself. Sundeep, you were the one that came. You obviously have a playlist of podcasts. So who are some of the influences that you think about as saying, I really love their work and want to try to, in
Yeah.
some way, model this after them?
And I think, speaking to what you were saying, like it feeling like an intimacy, I think it's how authentic your host is. And do they actually lead, or do they walk the walk with the questions that they're asking and the guests that they have? So, one of my absolute favorites is the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast. Hands down, there are episodes that I've listened to 3 times. There's so many great takeaways. And my other one is Diary of a CEO, just because he has a lot of great authors that are on his podcast. His style is quite different from Andy Stanley's, but I take away a lot from both of them. Those are my main two that I listen to.
Yeah. And so Diary of a CEO, I see his clips more than I listen. I don't listen to his. And so I don't know, again, if it would be a different experience if I was just listening, because I see him. And even in those visuals, he wrestles with questions. Like he goes, do you think about that or whatever? And so I like that stuff. And Andy Stanley.
It's hands down probably one of the best podcasts in terms of leadership and the guests that he has on and the questions he asks.
What about you, Kristi?
I love the Mel Robbins podcast because it's like you said, how she connects with the listener. Even the way she asks the questions, you think that you're part of that conversation or part of that dialogue. I like that she's unfiltered and loses her mind sometimes. And who else? It's a bit woohoo, but I like Gabby Bernstein, which is all around manifestation and whatnot. So I listen to that one sometimes. And then I like some of the leadership ones, like Adam Grant or Simon Sinek. So it kind of depends on the day, the drive.
Yeah.
Choosing a radio station, right? Sometimes you choose who you want to listen to while you're driving.
It does blow my mind. So when I was creating this manual that we talked about, and then I did a couple of workshops on it with teachers and educators thinking about podcasting, and there's really, I don't know, there's probably more genres than what I'm thinking of, but there's the narrative podcast that you would find on like This American Life and so forth, where it's more kind of investigation. So it's not just an interview, there's recording, then there's out in the field, and there's different voices. So it's more of a narrative storytelling experience. And then there's a few that are just monologues. So there's no guest, they're just sharing a thing they know. But this whole interview thing, which is the dominant category, I feels like, it amazes me how much people like that. Like in some ways it's just so simple. I'm just talking to another person. Like why is this such a fascinating, but I think you're all identifying the fact that number one, you've got somebody that's just authentic. Who doesn't like having a conversation with somebody that's interesting? All right, let's start there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the niche that people drill into, I think, is also fascinating, right? Get really specific with me. I'm almost more fascinated by people that talk about things that I don't really know about, maybe don't even super care about, but they're so passionate about it. I'm just sucked in. Like, tell me more. I'll learn. It's why I watch cooking shows on TV. It's not good. Or carpentry shows. I don't do any of those things really well, but I like watching other people talk about it and deconstruct their thinking, right? So I don't know if that's an educator in us that kind of enjoys that introspection and metacognition, but yeah,
As you said that, I was thinking about the classroom and how you, like as a teacher, intensely get to know every student. And like, it's always, sometimes it's a bit of a game, right? To try and figure out for some of those quirky kids, like what makes them tick and how do you build that connection? And like you're describing with the podcast, it's the same thing. They might be talking about something that you have no interest in, but it's fascinating that they love it. So why
yes.
not?
Yeah, I would, and that's the thing for people that don't listen to podcasts. I feel like I would, it's like people who are voracious readers who say there's a book for everybody. So there's people who just, they will work. And you see this with parents and kids, right? Especially boys who may be reluctant readers. There's this challenge. Like, I know I can find something that you will enjoy. And I feel it's the same thing with podcasts. I can't imagine if somebody says, I'm not interested in podcasts. That's saying I'm not interested in life, in learning. Yeah, you are. And again, I don't know. I think that the format is really compelling for everybody, but maybe there's people who could argue and saying, I don't want to have that connection with another person in a podcast. I don't know. Tell me about who's coming on, who you're excited about, maybe upcoming guests that you're super excited about, or maybe you said you had big dreams of people who you maybe haven't invited yet, but hope to get on, or just, I don't know, just anybody that's kind of on the horizon that you're going to be excited to share.
Okay, not only was I voluntold, then Sundeep sat me down and said, okay, you're going to reach out to people and you're going to get these guests for us. And here's the people I want on the show. Oh, okay. And I don't know why. It's really weird because my husband would probably tell you if he tells me that I need to do these things, I just kind of laugh. Or if my mom told me to do something, like I almost took pride in not always doing what they said. But for some reason, Sundeep gives me directions and I follow them. So it's kind of a strange relationship evolving. But her dream guest at first, I said, who do you want on the show? And she said, Wayne Gretzky. I said, for God's sake, I do not know Wayne. Like, we don't have a name yet with Wayne, but that's Sundeep's big dream. Uh, as a big hockey fan. But we have had some pretty awesome guests on so far. So our first two that are currently live are Peter Senge and Nicola Wilson, who both talk about compassionate systems. Over the next couple of weeks, we have Dan Ponte, who's written many leadership books. His most recent one is called Work Life Bloom. Double check the title right behind me. We have Lisa Bayliss coming on, who wrote a book that we use quite frequently around self-compassion for educators. And then we have a theme of resiliency coming up in the spring with Dr. Michael Unger. And then we interview a student or an ex-student who's a graduate who had a really traumatic life story who talks about resilience in her own personal experience. But by far, and I don't mean to offend any of our other podcast guests, but by far for me, the one that I hold closest to my heart so far is we had the opportunity last week to interview Chief Robert Joseph, who is the author of, oh, am I going to say it right?
Namwayat.
Namwayat is his book, and he is head of Reconciliation Canada. And he is, I believe he said 85. And it's just an example of, it would have been difficult for him as he's retired now. He's 85 years old. He's living in a remote community. So to have him come to Surrey and present for the day would have been hard for him and hard for the system to pull everyone together. And yet with the podcast, we were able to just have that hour talking to him about his experience as a residential school survivor and his hopes for children and the work he's done helping other survivors from residential schools, but mainly the work to transform systems within our country. And I just, like, as we were driving home after, I just thought, like, that was probably my favorite hour of this school year, because when do you have that opportunity to just sit with someone who is so wise and so hopeful despite the harm that's been done to him, and give such a beautiful message to educators. And it just felt like such an honor that we got to sit with him. And I can't wait to be able to share that story and amplify his voice and share his work. And as Sundeep mentioned, like when you have the podcast, it's around forever. So, someone may have missed it if it was a Pro D day, but we can use
Right.
his recording in classes and whatnot. So that was my favorite.
Mm-hmm. He was so inspiring. Just an excellent book that he wrote, and just talking to him, just such a inspiring human being.
Again, I don't mind admitting that the podcast for me, it's a little bit selfish. I want to talk to these people, and whether anybody else finds it compelling or not, I don't care. Like, it's all about me, right? No, but seriously, it's not all about me, but at the same time, I am invested in the people. I'm not going to have somebody on my podcast that I go, I don't really care about this person. Like, I used to watch, when you just watch talk shows on TV, and you could see every once in a while, someone would be on the show that was there promoting a book or something. Like, you could tell the host wasn't as interested, and then you can tell times when the host is like really fascinated with this person, and it's just them talking, right? It gets back to this intimacy thing. These are just two human beings or three human beings having a conversation together that they really care about, and you're just eavesdropping at the coffee shop, getting to listen in on this really fascinating conversation. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, I think you guys, congratulations on the start and just your efforts to doing this. I would highly recommend that all school districts figure out, for whatever reason, for whatever purpose. I think there's so much. I would say to you all, even if all you did was interviewed fascinating people within the Surrey school system, you would have a plethora and a never-ending list of fascinating, interesting people. So whether you go with, I'm sure at some point you'll have some internal folks as part of that conversation, but like, you're well positioned to keep this going for as long as you want. So as part of the sort of leadership conversation, we've dabbled in it. Your show is about leadership, and my show is about leadership. I'd love to kind of just hear a little bit about without going too far, but really just a couple questions around leadership. And I think the one thing I want to ask, and I'll start with you, Sundeep, asking you've been a principal, and you've kind of talked the fact that you have your 14 years as a principal.
I believe so, yeah.
In the principal world, that's a long time. Like, you are a legit veteran in this space. I also recognize, at least from what I've seen and what everyone shares, that we are in a bit of a leadership crisis, that there are fewer people stepping up to take on these leadership roles because they're hard, because they're challenging, and for lots of other reasons, the same reasons why young people in general aren't getting into education, but let alone the leadership. So you're in your building right now at Douglas Elementary, and you see a young teacher, aspiring teacher, that you think, I think they would make a wonderful principal leadership someday. Or they come to you and say, how do you be a principal? What advice would you give those people as they're starting out and thinking about a career in educational leadership?
Oh, I think in educational leadership, the very first place that it starts is your love for teaching. And it was really difficult for me to go into admin because I loved the classroom so much. If you love teaching enough, you also buy into building systems within your school to create capacity with your colleagues. So that's one of the beautiful things that has happened at Douglas, is I have this amazing team. And it's because as a leader and with teacher leaders, we put in a system in place, like with a mentorship program, with the way teachers are grouped in their pods where they're supporting each other. So just having that mentorship, if there is a teacher that wants to become a leader, a conversation starts with becoming an instructional leader, because that's really important. Teachers, I don't think, my personal opinion, the principals that I respected the most as a teacher were principals who identified themselves as a teacher, were principals who were interested in my reading program, my writing program, my numeracy program, came into my classroom, asked questions, watched lessons. That piece foremost is very important, and the care for kids. And then it comes down to, who is your mentor? Who you have as your mentor makes a really big difference. I was fortunate enough to have great mentors as a teacher and as a VP. And I've had those conversations with people on my staff, and we've talked a lot about, if you want to go into admin, what is your purpose? Why do you want to do this? There's all these challenges, but these are the beautiful things about being a school leader. It's the events that you create, the memories for students, and helping other people grow. If you want to do that, you will make an excellent school leader. And it also comes down to your daily habits, because it's a job where you have to juggle a lot. And it's really important that your lifestyle or your habits can make you the most efficient.
That's interesting. And I don't think I've had anybody, I've asked this question a lot, say loving to teach. But I think what it made me think of as you shared that was an empathy, right? Like having empathy for your colleagues, I want you to love this. I want you to love your kids, and I want you to feel that way. And so that's very difficult to do if you are distant from that and are thinking about, and I hope there's not many that are thinking the reason I want to become a principal is so I don't have to be a teacher. That seems problematic. That doesn't seem like it would end well. But I'm always fascinated by people who say that while that reality is true, it is a different job. That there are parallels, sure, that you're going to bring with you in terms of the way you lead a classroom as the way you lead a principal, but you are talking with adults, you are talking about other levels. And so being a great teacher doesn't automatically make you a great leader.
Mm-hmm.
But probably being a poor teacher won't work either. So yeah, no, I love that. What about you, Kristi? What are your kind of thoughts on that advice you would give to the younger generation?
Well, I'll piggyback a little bit on what Sundeep was just talking about, because it reminded me of a meeting we had last week. We have a whole bunch of different leadership theories in our district, but one is optional for experienced vice principals. So some of our experienced PVPs have said, hey, like, we do all this stuff for people who are new, but what about those of us that are just genuinely interested in leadership and want to find ways to connect? So we started a series for vice principals called Leading with Purpose. And one of the activities we did was using Simon Sinek's work to figure out really, like, why did you become an educator? And for many of them, it was the first time they had asked themselves that question in a number of years. And so we did some walk and talks and came back and just really talked about, how do you reconnect here? Why did you go into this field? And when people were really able to narrow down what brings them joy, why they became an educator, then we actually took luggage tags. For someone who is a younger educator, I would just say, feel free to have that creativity and those new ideas and to speak up and voice them. It had me thinking about, when you had said you might ask us this, I was thinking about my first year teaching, and back in 99. And I remember having an idea for an assembly. And so I had shared that with our admin team. And the vice principal at the time, Doug Shepard, who is now a superintendent in Delta, he said to me, okay, so that's great, we'll do the assembly, but just let me know what you want the revised bell schedule to be for that day, like for the school, so that it would make sense to get to the gym and get back. But I just remember as a new teacher thinking, like, it was the biggest deal in the world. I'm like, are you kidding? I get to decide that day what time the bell rings? And oh my God, like, I'm not a principal, I'm not a superintendent, I get to change the times the bells ring. And now, like, now that I've been a principal and whatnot, I think that's ridiculous. Like, why did I think it was a big deal? But if I put myself back in the shoes of a new educator, it felt like someone trusted me, like my ideas were being heard, like I was given permission to run with something. And so I would encourage any aspiring leaders or educators to, when you have a new idea, to use your voice, to say it, to get involved. And, as you said, like a culture of yes, people do say yes.
That's about confidence too. Again, it goes back to, we've been talking about authenticity a lot in this conversation, but you've got to be there, because all of a sudden, if you're playing a game and then when you get into those positions, if you haven't explored that side of it and you haven't been forthright with your ideas, I think you probably have some challenges then moving forward. So those are awesome. So last hard question, and then sorry, were you going to add something?
I was just going to share with you, because you mentioned not as many people are stepping into leadership, and we certainly found post-COVID the same thing. But let me tell you, we just did a call out for vice principals. I think everyone all of a sudden wants to be a vice principal. We had so many applications. We saw such a spike this this
Wow.
year in people that are putting their names forward to leadership, that we're going to have some really hard choices to make. But it's kind of neat to see that that those numbers are rising again. So that's neat.
Yeah, and maybe that challenges my pre-assumption that that's happening. And although I'm going to say that maybe it's just a Surrey thing, and maybe it is. And listen, the fact that Surrey is culturally very positive and a great place to work invites those people. I would guess that there are districts that don't have that same kind of interest, and maybe it is an example. I don't see any of my mentors out there that I want their job, because their job looks really hard and difficult. So I think there's some culture. Again, I'm speculating, but I think maybe part of it is, to your point, Christy, is that coming out of COVID, maybe people are kind of realizing, okay, let's revitalize our excitement and passion for this work. So let's hope so. All right, one last hard question, then some easy ones. You got to name one person that you're grateful for in education. So this could be a coworker, mentor, it could be unsung hero, it could be somebody that just did something for you today that makes you think, oh, I'm thankful for them because they gave me a coffee today. So I understand that there are many people that would be on this list. So you don't need to tell me this is hard. I get it. It's hard. You don't need to tell me there's so many. I get it. There's so many. I'm telling you, give me one person that you're grateful for. And bonus, if it's somebody that might actually listen to this episode and hear them get a little shout out. It doesn't have to be that one, but that you get extra points for that.
As I had mentioned earlier, stepping into that role of vice principal was a really big decision for me. And when I stepped into that role, I didn't like the job initially because I missed the classroom so much. I just felt like I no longer had an anchor. And if I didn't have the principal who I had as a mentor, and it was Antonio Venderman, I don't think I would have stayed in the job. I remember that first month being really hard because I missed teaching. I missed my own classroom, and I thought, what have I done? And it was working alongside with him. He never made me feel like a VP. It was like we were partners. And it was just watching him in action and seeing how he did all the fun things. He did all the events with the kids. He met with kids one-on-one. So he was able to show me that being a principal isn't being in your office. You can still be an instructional leader. You still have those really strong connections with kids. And it was just the 2.5 years I worked with him was so much learning and so much fun that has stayed with me. So when I mentor VPs now, when I have vice principals, I think about that. I think about the experience I want them to have when they're working with me.
You have no idea, Sundeep, how happy that makes me. Antonio is what we call, he's a beaut. A friend of mine that we worked with Antonio for a number of years, he's a beauty. He really is. And I love it when somebody confirms the fact, like all those things you said, like, yeah, that's exactly the Antonio that I've known over the years. And the fact that you've been able to share that and confirm that makes me so. Antonio, we love you. Let's just make that clear. You're on the all-star team. Kristi, what about you?
I'm going to give the shout out to Linda Reeve, who Sundeep mentioned earlier in our podcast. She's one of our area superintendents in Surrey. But when I went through the process of switching districts and applying for this job, I think she took a little bit of a leap of faith because I didn't know anyone in Surrey, and I was a bit of a stranger to the Surrey school district. And so she saw me, and I love my job so much that I go home every day and tell my husband pretty much every day that I love my job. He's like, honey, I know. Like, she absolutely, sometimes when you have to make a decision and you're choosing someone from another district you don't know, you're investing in an unknown. And so like you with the Ignite, she also took a risk and believed in me. So
again, I think Linda being the kind of the yes person behind the podcast, she gets a double shout out today, and well deserved. All right, home stretch here. Maybe you've already mentioned it, but I want to tell me what you're reading or listening to from a learning perspective. So one book, a podcast that's really kind of professionally speaking.
I'm reading Atomic Habits right now.
James
and I
Clear,
love it.
yes.
Yeah, it's excellent. Taking things away from it. It's a good read. I think every leader should read that book.
Kristi, what's yours?
I realized when you asked this that I had a bit of a problem. I think I have 10 books beside my bed, 10 beside my desk at home, and 10 on my desk at work. So I'm currently pretending to read about 30 books, but two that I'm using a little bit more that are ones that I wasn't familiar with, say, a month ago, are Mark Permain had recommended this one that BTS Spark put out that's Embracing Messy Leadership, and it's based on 20,000 conversations with school leaders. So we're using that. And then the other one that I liked that was part of my doctorate journey was it's Canadian, also by principles, but it's called the Intelligent Responsive Leader. So those are two that I'm reading
Nice.
and using in our workshop. Yeah.
Now, as busy leaders and moms and texting at 8 o'clock at night and everything, you got to find some time all right, let me just chill and watch something maybe mindless even. So, because I like getting into this one, and I like people being a little vulnerable, telling me listen, I don't know if you binge watch trashy stuff or whatever, but if you are, even better. But what is your sort of go-to? So Sundeep, it already sounds like you're watching a little bit of hockey, so that's part of your deal, but I don't know, what else you got on the binge list?
I'm watching Paradise right now. It's on Disney.
Okay.
It's
I've heard that one's supposed to be good.
It's really good.
Is it like dystopic or
Sort of
futuristic? What is it?
Yes, it's like there's something
But am I
terrible
going to get depressed if I
happens.
watch it? Because I don't want to get depressed.
Maybe a little, but not really.
Okay, all right. Okay, it was on my list, so
Okay,
that's
you should watch it. It's excellent.
Okay, all right.
Okay, here's
Christie,
the
what do you
thing. I feel like we've spent 40 minutes together, and hopefully we're building credibility in the sense like we sound like educators. And I am just going to throw that all away. Even a shout out to Linda. She's probably going to want to fire me after I say this online, but I have never in my life missed an episode of The Bachelor. Like for 20 years, I
Yes,
have watched
yes.
every episode. I watched The Golden
Yes.
Bachelor. I watched The Bachelorette. My husband watches it as well. So much so that when he was he's a police officer now, but when he was a firefighter, he missed too many practices because The Bachelor was on Monday nights, and they finally put a rose at his locker. And yeah, I'm addicted. I'm sorry.
That's awesome. No, that's good. That's good. Because listen, it allows somebody else because I've had people come on the podcast, and I'm not saying, they're just saying I don't watch TV, and so it becomes I just feel like I'm a big loser because like I watch lots of trash shows too, so that makes me feel like I'm not quite a loser. If Christie Blakeway is
Right?
watching Bachelor,
I know.
I'm good.
Well, and they guarantee every week or every season that it will be the most dramatic rose ceremony yet.
I'm sure
So how do you
it is.
not
I'm
watch
sure it is.
Right? How do you?
I'm sure it is. Yeah, the Bachelor phase in I got 3 adult daughters and my wife. I think they fizzled out on the Bachelor. There was a peak point where it was a big TV watch, but they're not committed. My wife is still dedicated to Survivor. That's been her thing from day one. And I'm an in and out Survivor, but I don't mind it. So anyway, that's all good. Okay, last question real quick. Sundeep, I find out like you're in South Surrey.
Yeah.
And I have not spent a lot of time White Rock, that whole area. So give me some place in that area. I don't know if you live there or not, doesn't matter, that I should check out in that part of the city.
Okay, so you know what, Dean? I saw that question, and I don't have anything to recommend. I'm going to tell you why.
All right.
Because I basically work, then I come home, and I take my kid to his soccer practices or his games. I just don't really explore a lot. Like, I wish I could sit here and say there's this really cool bistro in Vancouver, and I actually Googled some cool places. But then I thought I'm just going to be fake. Like, really,
Okay.
You know what I do? I come home, I watch TV, I text Christie, I take my kid to his practices, or
Where's
I
the
practice with him.
Is the soccer facility a nice facility?
Yeah, Cloverdale. It's in Cloverdale Athletic Park. It's great.
All right. There you go. You're just telling me what you know. It's fine. I might not get there, but listen. All right, Christie, then you've got to come up with something big now because Sundeep dropped the ball on this one.
Exactly. So here's the thing. As I mentioned, I wasn't familiar with Surrey when I got here. And so our school district is Surrey and White Rock. And I only live in Maple Ridge. It's not far. It's across the bridge. But I haven't really been to Surrey very much. And I'd been to White Rock once when it was actually my very first day teaching in '99. A handful of us went to White Rock that night and had ice cream. So I just assumed it looked the same as 1999. Turns out it doesn't. It's grown quite a bit. Turns out it's quite the happening place. So I went down to White Rock with my husband, and because I felt like I should know the district I'm working in. And we went to this ice cream place on this corner right across from the pier called Maya's. And they have that typical soft serve machine as well with the vanilla and chocolate. But the difference is the chocolate also has cinnamon flavor in it. And I love cinnamon. So the blend of the vanilla, chocolate, and cinnamon. I am obsessed with this place. It is a good thing that the school board office is far away from here. And they're not open on Mondays and Tuesdays. So if I'm truly going to confess, I purposely go to the schools in the South on either a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday because you can get the soft serve. And yeah, it's I'm obsessed with it. So I would recommend Maya's in White Rock.
I got a soft spot for ice cream, so that could be. And that's honestly too, as many times as I've been to Surrey, and I think I even have a cousin that lives there that he texts me once in a while, say, "Hey, come next time you're in Surrey," and I never do. So now maybe I have an additional reason. All right, so boy, this has been great. So if there's only a way that you were close enough that you can combine that soft serve with the Bachelor, what an evening that! But Bachelor's like Monday nights, isn't it? So that's not even it's not even possible if these two things could combine.
I can do the Bachelor.
Listen, it was a treat to spend time with both of you. And as I said, I do this for selfish reasons. I don't care. I want other people to listen to it for sure. But even if they didn't, I'm happy. I had a great conversation. It was great to meet you, Sundeep. And I'm sure our paths will cross. And Kristi, next time we got to make sure that we connect for sure next time I'm in Surrey.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
It was great.